China's economy is picking up as the country continues to dig its way out of the turmoil caused by the coronavirus pandemic. The world's second-largest economy expanded 4.9% in the July to September quarter compared to a year ago, according to government statistics released Monday. The pace was quicker than the 3.2% increase that China recorded in the second quarter when it managed to avoid the pandemic-fueled recession that has gripped much of the globe. But the growth was also a bit weaker than expected. Analysts polled by Refinitiv predicted that China's economy would expand 5.2%. China's economy continued its rapid rebound last quarter, with the recovery broadening out and becoming less reliant on investment-led stimulus, wrote Julian Evans-Pritchard, senior China economist for Capital Economics, in a research note. As much of the world continues to struggle with the virus, China's recovery has been relatively speedy. The country enforced stringent lockdown and population tracking policies intended to contain the virus and set aside hundreds of billions of dollars for major infrastructure projects to fuel economic growth. The economy grew a cumulative 0.7% through the first 9 months of this year. What's more, the monthly data show that growth was still accelerating heading into Q4, Evans-Pritchard added. Industrial production grew 5.8% in the third quarter from a year ago, according to Lu Aihua, a spokeswoman for China's National Bureau of Statistics. That's faster than the second quarter's 4.4% uptick. The service sector also expanded at a faster pace, up 4.3% this quarter compared with 1.9% in the April to June period. The service sector had been lagging behind other industries earlier this year as partial lockdowns and social distancing policies remained in place, noted Chaiping Zhu, global market strategist at J.P. Morgan Asset Management. But the more recent recovery signals a more broad-based growth in the economy, he added. Retail sales are also improving, up 0.9% in the third quarter from a year ago, with a 3.3% gain in September alone. And the unemployment rate is dropping, 5.4% in September, compared to 5.6% in August. So far we can say consumption has already climbed out from the pandemic's deep shock, Lu said at a press conference in Beijing. The recovery is underway. She added that more people are willing to come out from their homes and spend money in the physical shops as the pandemic has been brought under control. Asian markets were fairly muted in Monday trade. China's Shanghai Composite, SHCOM, rose slightly before the GDP announcement but reversed gains to trade about 0.3% lower. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index, HSI, gained 0.7% positive but slightly lower than earlier in the morning. Japan's Nikkei, N225, rose 1.1% and South Korea's Kospi, added 0.7%.
Former Jammu and Kashmir Chief Minister and PDP President Mahbooba Mufti, who was released from detention after over a year, said that she would continue her struggle for the restoration of Article 370 and the resolution of the Kashmir issue. She termed the centre's decision of August 5 as a daylight robbery. We all have to pledge that we will take back what was snatched illegally, undemocratically and unconstitutionally on August 5 last year. We will also have to work for the resolution of Kashmir issue, for which thousands of people have laid down their lives, Mahbooba said in an 83-second audio message on Twitter late on Tuesday night. Addressing after 14 months, the PDP leader said it will not be an easy task as there will be difficulties in this path, but our steadfastness and determination will be our aids in this struggle. On August 5 last year, the center had ended the special status of Jammu and Kashmir and bifurcated it into Union territories on August 5. Mahbooba also demanded the release of Kashmiri people languishing in various jails. As I have been released, all other persons from Kashmir who were detained in various jails across the country should also be released, she said. Mahbooba was released on Tuesday night after the Union Territory Administration revoked the Public Safety Act charges against her more than a year after she was detained following the abrogation of the special status of Jammu and Kashmir. The development came barely 2 days before the Supreme Court was to hear the matter related to her detention. Mahbooba, 60, who was initially put under preventive custody on August 5 last year and later booked under the stringent PSA on February 6, was shifted to her official residence on April 7 after it was declared a subsidiary jail by the authorities.
For more than 3 years, federal prosecutors investigated whether money flowing through an Egyptian state-owned bank could have backed millions of dollars Donald Trump donated to his own campaign days before he won the 2016 election. Multiple sources familiar with the investigation told CNN. The investigation, which both predated and outlasted Special Counsel Robert Mueller's probe, examined whether there was an illegal foreign campaign contribution. It represents one of the most prolonged efforts by federal investigators to understand the president's foreign financial ties and became a significant but hidden part of the special counsel's pursuits. The investigation was kept so secret that at one point investigators locked down an entire floor of a federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. so Mueller's team could fight for the Egyptian bank's records in closed-door court proceedings following a grand jury subpoena. The probe, which closed this summer with no charges filed, has never before been described publicly. Prosecutors suspected there could be a link between the Egyptian bank and Trump's campaign contribution, according to several of the sources, but they could never prove a connection. It's not clear that investigators ever had concrete evidence of a relevant bank transfer from the Egyptian bank. But multiple sources said there was sufficient information to justify the subpoena and keep the criminal campaign finance investigation open after the Mueller probe ended. CNN learned of the Egypt investigation from more than a dozen sources familiar with the effort, as well as through hints in public records, including newly released court documents and Mueller witness interview summaries called 302s that CNN and BuzzFeed obtained through lawsuits. In a court filing last month, the Justice Department confirmed that when the special counsel's office shut down in 2019, Mueller transferred an ongoing foreign campaign contribution investigation to prosecutors in Washington. Some of CNN's sources have confirmed that the case, which Mueller cryptically called a foreign campaign contribution probe, was in fact the Egypt investigation. The probe was confirmed this week by a Justice Department senior official who responded to CNN's queries. The case was first looked at by the special counsel investigators who failed to bring a case, and then it was looked at by the U.S. Attorney's Office and career prosecutors in the National Security Section, who also were unable to bring a case. Based upon the recommendations of both the FBI and those career prosecutors, Michael Sherwin, the acting U.S. attorney, formally closed the case in July. Top U.S. envoy on Monday, October 12, called China an elephant in the room and said Washington is keen to advance India's interests across the Indo-Pacific region. Deputy Secretary of State Stephen Biegun said the U.S. was exploring ways to empower India without altering what he called New Delhi's strong and proud tradition of strategic autonomy. Began spoke in New Delhi at the opening session of the India-US Forum after his three-day visit to India kicked off on Monday. India has a strong and proud tradition of strategic autonomy, and we respect that. We do not seek to change India's traditions, he said. Rather, we want to explore how to empower them and India's ability to defend its own sovereignty and democracy and to advance Indian interests across the Indo-Pacific region. In that direction, Washington has increased its foreign military sales and intelligence sharing with India, the number 2 U.S. diplomat said. But there is more that we can do, including strengthening India's ability to defend itself and by promoting interoperability among our militaries, he said. Began cautioned about rising China in the region. Of course, as we advance in this direction, there is an elephant in the room, China, he said. His visit follows a meeting last week between U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and his counterparts of India, Japan and Australia in Tokyo, who together make up the 4 Indo-Pacific nations known as the Quad. The group of the 4 nations is seen as a counterweight to China, who experts say is flexing its military muscle in the South China Sea, East China Sea, Taiwan Straits and along its northern border with India. Pompeo had said China's increasingly assertive actions across the region make it more critical than ever for the Quad to cooperate and protect their partners and people from Chinese exploitation, corruption and coercion. Began's New Delhi visit also comes amid a recent flurry-up in military tensions between China and India over the disputed mountainous border in the Ladakh region. Washington has also increasingly criticized Beijing over the coronavirus, trade, technology, Hong Kong, Taiwan and human rights. China has denied allegations of covering up the pandemic, saying it acted quickly to provide information to the World Health Organization and the world. It says the U.S. is the biggest aggressor in the South China Sea. Beijing also denies human rights violations in its handling of Hong Kong and minority Muslims in the Xinjiang region. It accuses Western nations of meddling in its internal affairs. Began said that the partnership between the 4 Quad countries is driven by shared interests, not binding obligations, and is not intended to be an exclusive grouping. Any country that seeks a free and open Indo-Pacific and is willing to take steps to ensure that should be welcome to work with us, said Began. Began is expected to lay the groundwork for the 2+2 dialogue during his visit to India between Pompeo and U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper and their Indian counterparts, External Affairs Minister Subramaniam Jaishankar and Defense Minister Rajnath Singh later this month. Began's remarks about respecting India's strategic autonomy were seen as placating India's concerns about forging direct strategic alliances in an attempt not to upset rising China. India is the only country among the Quad nations that shares borders with Beijing. Boris Johnson and his top 2 scientific advisors tonight wheeled out a set of striking statistics laying bare Britain's COVID-19 divide between the North and the South, as the Prime Minister warned of a second, more costly lockdown unless the outbreak tails off. In a rallying cry urging Britons to keep fighting the disease to protect the NHS and save lives, Mr. Johnson insisted the country knows how to drive down the virus because we did it before. And in warning the UK had reached a critical moment, he vowed not to throw in the sponge and pledged to bring in tougher measures if needed. And in a defiant message to Tory hawks desperate to reopen the economy faster, the PM insisted that letting the virus take its course in a Sweden-style approach risked overwhelming the NHS and causing thousands more deaths. He also warned it was too early to judge whether the rule of 6 and 10 p.m. curfew were working. Top experts have repeatedly warned that Britain needs to learn to live with COVID-19 because it will be with us for generations. Businesses fear tougher measures similar to ones imposed in the first draconian lockdown would cripple the economy even further. Mr. Johnson addressed the nation alongside Professor Chris Whitty and Sir Patrick Vallance despite coming under intense pressure. Scientists from such briefings amid complaints they are being used as propaganda to back up increasingly draconian restrictions. The trio presented maps that starkly expose the North-South coronavirus divide. And official data shows that the average number of positive tests each day is at least twice as high in northwest England as in any other region, and that Scotland's cases are 14 times higher than they were at the beginning of August, outpacing England's outbreak.
COVID-19 infections clearly started to rise after Super Saturday, according to an analysis of official data that has revealed the number of Britons being diagnosed each day is now 54% higher than it was a week ago as the outbreak continues to grow. Hundreds of thousands flocked to pubs, restaurants and hairdressers after they were finally allowed to reopen on July 4 after months of being closed to help contain the UK's coronavirus crisis. Leading scientists warned it would cause a spike in infections, while others insisted it was time the nation learns to live with the virus. Mail Online's crunching of government statistics shows COVID-19 infections started to rise within days of Brits being given freedom to enjoy the summer without being cooped up at home. Doctors say it can take patients up to 2 weeks to develop a cough or other telltale symptoms of the disease. Department of Health figures reveal the rolling 7-day average of daily cases on July 9 was 556, down 32% on the week before. But the growth rate had dropped from the -39% the previous day, showing that the outbreak wasn't shrinking as quickly. But it was not just a one-off. Statistics show the rate quickly started to spiral upwards, with July 13, 624 being a 6% jump on the previous week, 590. This was the first time the rate was positive, showing the outbreak had grown since the start of May when testing was massively ramped up to help officials get on top of the pandemic. Infections began to dip off in the middle of August, but it is not clear why. They soon started to pick up towards the end of the month and spiraled after the bank holiday and over the start of September when millions of children went back to school and workers dashed back to the offices. Growth rates plunged around mid-September when Prime Minister Boris Johnson introduced the Rule of 6 in a desperate attempt to curb spiraling rates of coronavirus. The average number of daily infections compared to the week hit a high of 84% on September 12 but fell every day until September 19, government statistics show. They have risen for 6 consecutive days since then, Mail Online can reveal. Health chiefs announced another 6,874 cases yesterday, meaning the 7-day rolling average, 5,329, is 54% higher than it was a week ago, 3,466. By contrast, the rate yesterday was 48% higher than it was last Thursday. Some top scientists had insisted there was not a true rise in cases because the test positivity rate, how many cases are found for every swab completed, had not changed wildly, suggesting any spike is down to swabbing capacity being ramped up. However, this appears to no longer be the case, with government data showing around 20 out of every 1,000 people are testing positive now, up from the 15 on September 12. It comes as chief scientific advisors to the government, Professor Chris Whitty and Sir Patrick Vallance, terrified the nation by their gloomy prediction that cases may reach 50,000 per day by mid-October if nothing is done. They claimed infections were doubling every week in line with growing outbreaks in Spain and France. But scientists shot down the claims, warning it was based on old data that relied on just a few hundred positive cases. Even Boris Johnson distanced himself from the claims, saying the outbreak could be doubling up to every 20 days. Other figures from NHS Test and Trace also suggest cases had dwindled last week. But the newest statistics, released yesterday, only go up until September 16, meaning any spike in the past week has yet to be confirmed in another government data set. Department of Health figures show the doubling rate of cases is around 2 weeks. Almost 5,000 people are being diagnosed with COVID-19 every day at the moment, up from 2,500 on September 10. But this is based on lab-confirmed infections, and thousands of patients won't ever develop any symptoms. The Office for National Statistics, ONS, which tracks the size of the outbreak by carrying out thousands of random swab tests, estimates cases have risen 60% in a week to 9,600 a day. While King's College London researchers, who are behind a symptom tracking app, say it has doubled over the same time frame to around 16,000. Matt Hancock yesterday suggested the true number of cases occurring each day was in the region of 10,000. And the health secretary pointed out that the spike now is nowhere near levels seen during the darkest days of the crisis in March and April, when 100,000 people were getting infected every 24 hours. Yesterday, a record high daily cases of 6,874 cases were diagnosed, a huge rise compared to last Friday when 4,322 people were diagnosed with the disease. But millions of Brits went undiagnosed during the first wave of the pandemic due to the government's lackluster testing regime, so it is impossible to accurately compare numbers now to those in March and April. Top experts say more than 100,000 people were actually catching the virus every day during the darkest days of the first wave. Now, estimates range between 9,600 ons and even 18,000. The latter estimate was suggested by Dr. Julian Tang, a respiratory disease expert at the University of Leicester, who claimed the actual number of cases occurring each day in England now may be 3 times greater than what official figures show because of how common asymptomatic patients are. Since reporting of cases varies greatly from the start of the pandemic and even now, day to day, it is helpful to look at a wider time span for signs of change in the outbreak. This provides a clearer picture of where the pandemic is accelerating, staying the same, or reducing because it's less affected by daily variations in reporting. Data shows the rolling 7-day average currently stands at 5,329. That means, over the past 7 days, that many people have been diagnosed in the UK every 24 hours, on average. The figure is 54% higher than that recorded last Friday, 3,466, and it has been increasing every day for the past 6 days. Cases have not been shrinking since the end of August, when the 7-day average was in minus figures for 4 days running. And from around April 17 to July 12, the average consistently fell because of lockdown. Between 9,000 and 16,000 Britons are catching COVID-19 every day. Data shows between 9,000 and 16,000 Britons are getting infected with coronavirus every day, according to researchers monitoring the UK's outbreak. King's College London, KCL, scientists behind the COVID Symptom Tracker mobile app estimate that there were at least 16,310 daily cases of the disease in the last week, more than double the 7,536 estimated last week. The Office for National Statistics, a government-run agency, has made a more modest estimate yesterday, saying it thinks around 9,600 people are contracting the virus every day, a 60% rise from the 6,000 a week prior. Both surveillance projects are picking up far more than the government's official testing program, which recorded 6,000 plus cases on Thursday and Wednesday. KCL collects its data by sending tests to people who report telltale symptoms of COVID-19 into the mobile app, while the ON study sends tests to random households regardless of their health status. Data from the symptom tracking app, which has seen millions of Brits sign up and report their symptoms, suggests there are nearly 150,000 people currently suffering symptomatic COVID-19, although many more will have no symptoms. This figure has more than doubled since last week, when there were about 70,000 symptomatic patients. The chief scientist behind the app said it was fresh evidence the crisis was rising at an alarming rate. On Monday, Sir Patrick Vallance and Chris Whitty made a stark forecast of 50,000 coronavirus infections per day by mid-October, which could lead to some 200 deaths a day by November. But it has since been revealed this scenario, claimed not to be a prediction, was based on studies involving just hundreds of positive cases. A spokesman for Sir Vallance confirmed on Tuesday that the 7-day estimate was heavily based on findings of the weekly survey of the Office for National Statistics and the React-1 survey by Imperial College London. The studies test a random sample of 100,000 people, but as the virus is circulating at low levels, they have to base their predictions off only a few hundred positive cases. In the last React-1 study on September 7, they spotted 136 coronavirus cases out of 153,000 people sampled. The low number led them to predict that infections could double every 7 days. This doubling every 7 days was used by the government's top scientists to reach a scenario in which 50,000 cases a day were being diagnosed in October. The government admitted it used these surveys as opposed to actual testing data because it was worried that the figures lagged behind the spread of the disease. Even the Prime Minister appeared to undermine the pair on Tuesday when he admitted cases in the UK could be taking as long as 20 days to double in number. The same day the terrifying predictions were lambasted as implausible by scientists, Mr. Johnson stood in front of the House of Commons to unveil a wave of new measures designed to stop the spread of the disease, including making the army available to help police enforce stringent new coronavirus rules such as a 10 p.m. curfew on pubs and restaurants. Figures based on diagnosed cases alone suggest the outbreak is doubling every 14 days, rising from an average of 2,527 infections a day on September 10 to 4,964 yesterday. Meanwhile, the growth rate suggests cases are doubling between every 10 to 20 days. The size of the growth rate indicates the speed of change. Yesterday, the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, SAGE, reported the growth rate was growing by between 4 and 8% each day, up from the 2 to 7% they reported last week. The range they gave on September 11, 2 weeks ago, was from -1 to 3%, meaning there was some possibility that the number of new cases might still be falling slowly. Professor Kevin McConway, a statistician at the Open University, said, a 4% daily growth rate corresponds to a 32% weekly growth rate. And it corresponds to a time of about 18 days for the number of infections to double. An 8% daily growth rate corresponds to a weekly growth rate of about 71%, and a doubling time of about 9 days, just a bit over a week. So, in very broad terms, these growth rates do match the conclusions on the growth of new cases in yesterday's update on the ONS infection survey. And they are certainly big enough to be worrying. Scientists say the more testing, the more cases are found in the community and reported by the government. This can give the impression there are more infections in the population when there are not. Testing has been ramped up over the summer, doubling from a daily average of 112,000 on July 16 to 227,000 a day now. During this period, Government-reported cases have increased 8-fold. A useful measurement of whether cases are on the up due to testing or a genuine increase in spread is the test positivity rate, the number of people who test positive out of the total number swabbed. Department of Health data shows 19.83 of every 1,000 people are testing positive for the virus under the current testing scheme, up from 5 in July and 13 2 weeks ago. It's been rising steadily over July, August and September as a number of coronavirus restrictions were eased and people were encouraged to go back to work, eat out to help out, and children went back to school.
Now listen to the first interview with Kate and complete the notes by filling in the numbered spaces 1 to 5.
Hi there, Kate. Come on in. How are you today?
Fine, thanks.
Hi, Lukey. How's things?
Okay.
Well, as I explained on the phone, I'm a counsellor here at the Student Services section of the university. And I'm interviewing overseas students to help me draw up a guide for new students. So I'd be grateful if you could tell me a little about your time since you've been here in Cambridge.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, Kate, let's start with you. Okay. This is your second semester, isn't it? Could you tell us something about your first impressions of the town when you arrived?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I was struck by how quiet it is here in the evening.
Yeah, I suppose Cambridge is a quiet place. Where did you live when you first arrived?
Well, I went straight into student accommodation. It was a kind of student hostel.
Ah, right. So, you didn't have to worry about doing your own cooking or anything like that?
No, but sometimes I wished I had. The food at the hostel was awful.
Oh, dear. But how were the other students?
To be honest, I haven't managed to make many friends, even though the place is full. People seem to keep to themselves. They're not really very friendly.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Well, what about the actual course? You're studying,
I'm doing a master's by coursework in environmental studies.
Oh, right. And how are you finding that?
Yeah, well, it's been pretty good, really. I've enjoyed the course, but I feel there hasn't been enough contact with the lecturers.
Oh.
They all seem to be incredibly busy. The only chance I've really had to talk to them is on the field trip.
Well, that's no good.
Mm-mm.
Could anything be done to improve the course, in your opinion?
Well, I think it would be helpful to have meetings with lecturers on the course. Say, once a fortnight, something like that.
Regular meetings?
Uh-huh.
Yes, that could certainly help. Now, Kate, we'll come back to you in a minute, but I'd just like to ask Lucy some questions.
Before they continue the interview, look at questions 6 to 10. As you listen to the rest of the interview, complete the notes.
Lucy, where are you from?
I am from Indonesia.
And how did you find Cambridge when you first arrived?
Well, I like it here. I think the city is very beautiful.
What about your accommodation? Was that okay?
Yes, okay. At first, I stayed with a family for 3 months. They were very kind to me, but they had 3 young children, and I found it difficult to study.
Right, I see.
So after 3 months, I moved out, and now I live with 2 other students in a student house. It's much cheaper, and we like it there.
Good. And, what about your studies? What are you studying?
I'm doing a Bachelor of Computing.
Computing, I see. Apart from the language difficulties, if you can separate them, how have you found the...
Okay, but...
Yes, go on.
Well, the main difficulty for me is getting time on the computers in the computer room.
Ah.
It's always busy, and this makes it very hard to do my practical work.
Yes, I'm sure it would. Can you reserve time in the computer room?
No, you can't. But it would certainly help if we could reserve computer time.
Yes, I'll look into that and see if something can't be done to improve things over there. Now, let's go back to Kate.
Last week, the Chinese embassy in India issued an advisory to the Indian media asking it to follow the government of India's position on the Taiwan question and not violate the One China policy. The advisory came in the run-up to Taiwan's National Day on Saturday. This legitimately sparked outrage among Indian journalists. It also prompted the Ministry of External Affairs to say that the Indian media is free and reports on issues as it sees fit. This was then followed with the appearance of posters greeting Taiwan in Delhi's key diplomatic enclave put up by a local Delhi leader of the Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP. With the embassy complaining, they were taken down, but only because they weren't authorized. The episode reflects the undemocratic orientation of the Chinese embassy, much in line with the nature of the one-party regime in China. India is a proud democracy. It has a free and vibrant media. There is a healthy foreign policy debate conducted out in the open. Beijing's actions in recent years and its military aggression in Ladakh have antagonized the Indian street. There is today a strong view that India must speak up against Chinese efforts to institute its hegemony. The media will, as it must, give space to these views. The government will, as it must, respect diplomatic norms. In fact, many would suggest that it has too cautious in its approach to Chinese sensitivities. But the media is within its right to flag issues and expand the foreign policy discourse. China should not think it can do in India what it does in its own country and suppress the media. If it wants goodwill among Indians, it should instead reform its behavior. White